Rising with each beat of the music is bringing. We're flames in the fire that keeps burning. We're inviting the night in.
Tactical nuke incoming!
How's it going, everybody? This is Novakast back with some more videos for you guys. In this video, we'll be going over the second episode of the Onision documentary by Chris Hansen, streamed by or on Discovery Plus. Now, I think right off the bat, I'm going to say that there is less involvement with Chris Hansen with this one, which I kind of thought that was, okay. Especially with the kind of circle jerk that they had for Chris Hansen in the last episode. But I don't want to go too much into that since I've kind of made a huge rant about it in the last video, or at least discussing the documentary. So why don't we just go ahead and get started with this? Because there is quite a few things that comes up with this. Some things that I think I know a lot of people we're going to have issue with. I guess for starters, it gives, or at least displays, a very lengthy content warning discussing some of the things that we'll definitely have in this documentary. Things like discussions of explicit imagery and a variety of different notions when it comes to, or at least connection to, the content that Greg has posted. It's, after that, starts with, or at least continues with Shiloh, showing footage of the Shiloh X or slash Shiloh Onision house, where she talks about how she would describe it being kind of like a prison or slave labor. And she remarks about how the entire time with Greg, she felt like all he really cared about were the videos that he created and sex. She also remarked that apparently, and using their words, the experience or interaction with Greg was using quotes like a cult, her exact words. They also show footage of the of Onision calling the cops on Shiloh video. For those who don't remember which video that is, that's the one where Shiloh is breaking down. This is after she threatened to harm herself, and Onision's calling the cops on her, as well as Shiloh kind of giving her declaration of telling everyone how Greg has treated her. Which, I'm going to say, first viewing, actually, if at any point you watch that video, it's very hard to see, or at least to watch, really. Because of just, more than likely, just the mental breakdown that Shiloh was probably going through during that whole situation. Like, to the point where she was at her breaking point, or past her breaking point, due to Onision's behavior towards her. After that, she then remarks on, or at least after the footage of the video, remarks on how Onision has vendettas for anyone that goes against him in any way. And I believe it was Edwin Generations, or the main journalist who helped put this together, makes a remark about how Onision possibly takes joy for the harm he has done to others. We then go into Shiloh talking about how she threatened to harm herself. Chris Hansen, after that, then remarks on Onision's need for control, which I think is a constant that has been displayed throughout all of his videos, especially when it comes to people that he has been in contact with or interacted with. if you don't believe in the same thing that he believes in, then he will shame you for it. At some point after that, we get audio played from the cop video questioning Shiloh about her mental stability. And it notes that after the police were involved, she was admitted to a psych ward. They then play the Shiloh Threaten Me video from Onision, where he claims that he has been and I always laugh when he says this, in quotes, a prisoner of his own home. He claims for fear of his own safety, he had to run away, and claims Shiloh was threatening him.
You serious?
Yeah, and it really sucks that people actually fell for that shtick. Like, actually, people... It's unbelievable that people were that gullible to fall for that act. And using his audience to direct hate towards Shiloh the way he does. Which is disgusting. Altogether. Continuing on, though, we actually do have something for the documentary that I did not expect. The story for Adrian. Now, for those who don't remember who Adrian is, Adrian was somebody who was around the same age as Greg, who basically dipped out of the relationship real quickly after they found out how crazy Greg was. Not to mention crazy, but very clingy and obsessive. Now, I will say for the documentary itself, there was no appearance on camera, but they did use her letter in the doc, or at least segments of it. Now, I'm sure, by the way, for those who don't know, this is the same letter that Greg has tried to debunk and claim is false. But clearly, looking at the letter as well as looking at some of his past behaviors, as well as what's described here, you start to see a pattern. Or at least after the relationship, it's mentioned that Shiloh fell back into the behavior, or at least his behavior, and was dramatically pushed into being engaged with Onision. Right after Shiloh coming back, she becomes pregnant, and unfortunately, after a few months, they find out she miscarried, and after that, trying to go to Canada to recover, Onision then proceeds to send a firestorm of hatred towards Shiloh while she is trying to recover, and that pretty much puts the nail in the coffin for their relationship. After that, the documentary continues with discussing how Onision likes to pick fights with other content creators, uses examples like Shane Dawson or Eugene Cooney, one that they forgot to mention, or at least I don't know if they would want to mention because of his title, which is TJ, also known as the Amazing Atheist, which I'm surprised they didn't mention him. That was odd, but whatever. Actually, and speaking of Eugene Cooney, another thing that surprised me about this documentary, or at least this episode, Eugene Cooney makes an appearance and describes what she does on her channel, and talks about the harmful effects from Greg's videos. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the drama for Greg, but just in case you guys haven't, Greg has posted a lot of videos about Eugene Cooney. A lot of them very, very hateful towards her, especially when it comes to her condition. I'm trying to say condition so that way I can kind of be safe when it comes to what I talk about. But being very critical about her body, as well as making a poorly taste, or at least poorly choiced parody video, which is a quote-unquote Eugenie Cooney cooking video, where in some segment of the video he claims that, or makes the remark that for Eugenie Cooney to use the bathroom, she throws up. Which in of itself is fucked up in its own right. In fact, in this episode for the documentary, it also goes over the fact when it comes down to Onision making content on Eugenie Cooney. It goes over the fact that Onision did not make the Eugenie Cooney videos to, or at least for the sake of his quote-unquote concern for her, but rather making money off of her name, which kind of reminds me of a lot of other videos that Greg has done on people. After talking about Eugenie Cooney, we then get an appearance from Austin Hall, aka Greg Bundy Psycho Brat, or at Bid or Big Money Onision. Now, for those who don't know, you might see him constantly, or at least periodically, through Twitter, debunking or at least talking against some of the things that Greg has done. And I honestly think that this was an interesting kind of addition for this episode of the documentary, especially when it contradicts what they were trying to push when it comes to Chris Hansen being the start of the Onision discussion. Yeah, I know I said I wasn't going to get back onto this, but honestly, like, looking at it now, this is something that I should mention, because in the documentary, Austin talks about how they have been around for a decade, which is way longer than than pretty much Chris Hansen, quote unquote, got involved on the Onision topic.
Now come the puzzle and floor heads back and laugh. Ready?
But anywho, it then continues, or at least the documentary continues. The show clips of Jack and Glenn, Blair White, Repsion giving their opinions about Onision. They mention how Greg treated the detractors as villains, which usually when it comes down to videos about Greg, that's usually how he would respond to people who are against his actions or his behaviors, as villains or evil. In fact, usually they use the keyword hater as a way to try to denounce what people have to say, which you guys know how I feel about that particular word. After that, then or at least in the doc, they begin to talk about Taylor, aka Lainey, aka Kai, and how they would get to know Onision through texting, messaging, and a variety of other things. It is brought up in the documentary about how, at the time, Taylor was 17, and that they lived in the state of New Mexico, where at the age consent was 17, where Greg then moves to New Mexico to marry Taylor, which in a huge sense infuriated Taylor's family, where Onision then moves back to Washington with Taylor. Heck, interesting enough, it also brings up the letter that TJ, aka the Amazing Atheist, brought to the family's attention, or Taylor's family. For those who don't know, this is the same letter that Onision tries to claim Repsion wrote, calling him a stalker and a variety of other things. because Greg couldn't bring two to two together that it wasn't a Repsion that made the letter, but it was TJ. In the documentary, it mentions around, or at least a little bit after the marriage, Taylor gets her YouTube channel and is renamed Lainey. It's also noted in the documentary about the concerning transformation from Taylor to Lainey, and mentions how in 2019 Lainey would reveal their transition from female to male, as well as the name change from Lainey to Kai. There's also a remark made about Taylor, aka Lainey, aka Kai, no longer being the victim, but rather, or at least at this point, when it comes down to everything that's been going on, the same degree as a quote-unquote or alleged predator as Greg, aka Onision. We are then introduced to Alicia Kozak, hopefully I said her name correctly, who is a internet safety expert and abuse survivor. And for a brief segment, this individual goes over her experiences when it comes down to grooming, as well as her life experiences when it comes down to being an abuse survivor. The documentary goes over some of the implications of grooming, as well as the harm that it can cause to the victims. Through Alicia's expertise, she describes some of the tactics that Greg and Kai would probably implement to groom someone. After that, we get a segment introducing Regina, who is one of the girls that became Kai's ex-girlfriend, or at least one of Kai's girlfriends. She goes over how she came across Onision and Kai when she was around 15. She talks about how she came across an Onision video where he shames people who suffer from suicide. It's brought up from Alicia Kozak about how some people will use mental manipulation, as well as I don't know the best way to put it. It was just talking about how just shaming people for feeling a certain way to try to manipulate them on your side, which I thought was kind of interesting, especially with this individual kind of giving their expertise as to how Greg, or at least how Greg would go about trying to convince people to do things that he wants. Regina then continues to go over about how Lainey would send sexualized / explicit pictures to her, and due to Lainey's continuously escalating with explicit content, Regina began to feel like she had to do the same, and apparently was sending stuff to Lainey. Unbeknownst to her, though, apparently Greg was also watching while they were doing this. So I'm going to just say it adds to the creep factor, especially when the entire time with their conversations between Regina and Lainey, aka Kai, Greg has been watching them the entire time with what they've been doing. It then, or at least Regina then continues her story about how at some point she was then pushed aside for a friend of hers to be the next target for Greg and Lainey. They mentioned the friend in question at the time was 14. Now, for the entire time, the face is blurred for this individual, but if I were to guess, this individual that they describe quite possibly was Sarah, when it comes down to her situation and what she had to go through, which in of itself is sickening. Now, by the way, I want to make a quick note too, because Repsion made a video and he discussed one of his concerns was the fact that they were going to use Sarah's story without her consent. And sure enough, I'm assuming that's probably what happened, because Sarah wanted no involvement, but they used clips of her anyways to talk about her. Also, apparently, another thing that Repsion had an issue with was the fact that Shiloh made a remark about how she wasn't going to get involved if not everybody was on board. And sure enough, we have Shiloh still on the documentary. At this point, I think all I could say is I'm just gonna say, damn if I do, damn if I don't. It's at this point, she's on it. She's gonna give her points. She probably shouldn't have said the things she said about not being a part of it if not everybody was on board. But at this second, she's on it. So we have to move forward from there, because this thing is already happening. After that, they bring up how there were many girls after Regina and Sarah. Actually, quite a few people were brought over to Greg's household. And they bring up the fact that when it comes down to the dynamic, or at least the way they were able to lure some of these girls in, was at least trying to push Lainey into having sort of like a bisexual or alleged bisexual relationship with these girls, where Lainey would be girlfriends with these girls, and Greg would use that to try to, or at least for his own advantage when it comes to what he wants, which I think it's very clear, especially with a lot of the girls that have come and gone in his life. I think we know exactly what he wants. But anywho, I'm just gonna say, this was a hard thing. Like, it was 50 minutes, and it was hard to watch. It really was, especially with some of the things that have been described, and it's really infuriating. After that, around, I think between the last few minutes, we get a remark from the Pierce County Sheriff, making a remark about how there is actually with text, that there's an ongoing investigation. And they're talking about how apparently they have an investigation going on, and they just want to make sure that all their bases are covered and that they know the full story. Which, I don't know how I feel about that, especially because it sounds like, to me anyway, that they're still continuing to push the promise that there's going to be some legal action towards Greg. But unfortunately, I hate to be that guy, and don't make it seem like I'm trying to defend Greg, but so far, he's gotten away with it for the last decade with some of the things he's done. I have a hard time believing at this point now that they would find a way to do anything to him, let alone actually, have enough evidence to take him into custody. But at this point, we'll see. I honestly don't think it was appropriate to mention the fact that there's an investigation, especially with the empty promises from Chris Hansen about the FBI getting involved. But hey, that's me. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed this discussion of episode 2 of the documentary. What are your thoughts on the documentary itself? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you guys want to follow us on social media, links are in the description down below, as well as check out our daily content and the weekly podcast. With that being said, this is Rob Novakast signing off. Have a good one, and take care. Peace.